More on Apple Pay and the Secret Service, iMessage, and encryption. This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by the MacVoices Slack, available to all patrons of MacVoices. Sign up today at patreon.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we joined the MacVoices live panel in the midst of a bit of a heated discussion on Apple Pay and the credit card industry. Things get even hotter, though, when we dive into the reports that the Secret Service claims they have lost text messages because of iMessage and encryption. Let's go back and let the panel do the talking. A lot of interesting perspectives here, and I've, at the risk of dragging it up, Mark, the only thing is I have to wonder, and I'm not versed enough in exactly how the credit card companies share risk, but I feel like that if you have an Apple card, an Apple Pay transaction that has gone through the watch or the phone and it's secure, and if I'm a credit card company, I can feel a lot better about about that transaction not being hacked or bogus, as opposed to one where, I hand my credit card over to somebody in a restaurant and they take it back and, order a computer with it.
And your point is exactly the reason why if Apple ends up taking, like Mark says, 70, 80, 90%, all of it, at some point, I think that would actually be an issue if only Apple people could use electronic payments in places. That's not going to work, right? Because if you bust out the only other competition to let the Android people pay with their phones, then you're not going to say 30, 40% of the population can't use secure transactions on their devices because of reasons. That's why I don't think it will fly.
Yeah.
I think these credit card companies are lucky that Apple allows them to keep any revenue.
They should be sending Apple fruit baskets as a thank you for their incredible generosity. You are so right.
It's not just. It's American Express. You add American Express.
This article says is these poor credit card companies. I don't think credit card companies are required. To use Apple Pay. Aren't there cards that don't work with Apple Pay?
Oh, sure.
Isn't that something that they enter into a contract with?
Yeah, it's a contract
Apple
thing.
Yeah.
So. These companies
Visa,
can just choose to say
Discover, American Express, they all do it.
No Apple Pay.
A merchant could say no Apple Pay. Too.
Yeah, the merchant itself, true.
Yeah. So merchants, and that happens. We don't accept Apple Pay because they don't want to pay.
Well,
and then a lot of places won't even take
terminals. Yeah.
A lot of people. Terminals. I told you at the beach this summer, if you go to a lot of restaurants, they don't even take American Express, or they'll add like a certain percentage to your bill because Amex charges. So every time
I don't think the merchant pays anything for Apple Pay. It's the card issuing.
No, because I worked at an Apple reseller that used to yell all the time. That says we can't. Every time we do it, we're losing money, and he hated it. So unless that's changed in 3 years, the Apple gets a piece of that little transaction somehow every time you hit a ding.
Yeah, so I think the way it works is the bank gets the cut, and it has its own cost of goods are a certain amount of cents to Visa network, a certain amount of cents to Apple, but it's all money out of the pocket of the institution. And on what you're saying, I've started to see some restaurants and things, that in stores that they do say, okay, well, we have a 2.99% surcharge if you pay with a credit card versus cash, because they're getting tired of that. But I think, Jim, to your point, there's a lot of rumors out there about Apple wanting to get more broadly into the financial services business. So, I think your words,
sure.
5 years from now, prescient, that Apple could take out a lot of these. Again, it's not Visa, because Visa is the network. It's all the banks that fund the
card. And the banks are the one that do deals with Apple. It's only certain cards. You can only add Apple, your card to Apple Pay if that bank has a contract with Apple. So, if a bank doesn't want to pay this fee, they can just not do it. The thing is, banks want to pay the fee because they're afraid that, then the customer will choose some other card.
Is American Express like is Visa and MasterCard, they have different lenders. As you said, the name on the Visa doesn't mean anything. The bank name is who's lending you the money.
Right.
Is American Express their own thing? They don't have banks, right? They are the bank.
Oh,
I think they are the bank. I think that's
Yeah.
right.
So
both,
it's, yeah. Well, I mean, again, so they're kind of like the Apple of credit cards, and the fact that they're giving you the hardware and the software, right? They're the bank, and they're giving you the process to pay it. Whereas these other companies now, you got so if you got Visa involved, you have Fulton Bank involved, you have Apple Pay involved, you have all these people involved, and you're making a transaction that's getting some kind of fraction. The more people involved with this, the more that's going to go, and the more expensive it gets, and that's why you get the fees. And
Well,
the
no,
merchants
Apple's
sad about
getting
it.
a cut of the bank's cut. That doesn't mean the whole cut is going up. The bank is getting less.
The bank gets less.
The bank is the one that, Apple's taking part of the bank's cut.
But it all flows. Whoever's getting less is going to bring it to the customer. And I don't care if it's Apple.
I don't think they can do that.
They
No,
do.
not-
They raise your.
No,
Well-
not necessarily, Warren, because one of the things is that Discover wants me to pay with the Discover card instead of a Visa,
right.
and MasterCard wants me to pay with a MasterCard instead of Discover. And so, the more attractive and the more ways they can make it easier for me to use their respective cards through whichever bank is funding it, the better off that company and that bank are.
Right, but so what's their business reasons for
If-
wanting you to use it? So that's what I mean.
Because they want you to not pay it on time, and they're going to charge you through the nose on interest.
On interest,
Well,
And
Um,
penalties. And penalties.
That's where the money is.
yeah, and you're right. And penalties
In credit cards, if everybody paid on time, the banks would all go out of business.
right?
Yeah.
I think that like any Visa card, and I think MasterCard too, the cut that they take of the transaction is the same. A bank can't say, "Oh, we're going to take an extra 1%." That's controlled by the network. So the bank does a deal with the network, and then the bank can do another deal with Apple, but the bank can only give away what's its own money. It can't give away the network's money. It can't give away the merchant's money because that's not its. So it doesn't change the equation, and they wouldn't want to, because then people would just be like, okay, well, we're not going to use that. Imagine if you went to pay for something and they're like, oh yeah, if you use Fulton Bank, it's going to be an extra 1%. That doesn't work like that.
But they're doing it with
So Jim, you covered
Amex.
us.
But they are doing it with Amex versus Visa, and that's what's happening. So Amex, I know for 100% of the fact that it costs somebody. I don't know if it's a merchant. I don't know if it's a bank. I don't know who, but it costs somebody more to make that transaction with an
Ultimately,
In a lot of states, that's not legal.
Merchant.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
one
In California, they can't pass that through, except that there's an exception for gas stations.
So, Jim, I want to go back because you made, I think, a couple important points together. I think one thing you were talking about was the transaction fees, and to some extent, that's there's a bundle of fees that ultimately get accrued for the transaction. There's the lending institution's fee, and then there's the fee that, whether it's Visa or MasterCard, charge. Then there's the other thing is, the reason why you see so many offers for, you buy our card, we'll offer you, 1% on everything unless you use it for gas, and we'll give you 5%. Or we'll offer you 4% on travel and 2% on everything else. So those are all offers that the bank, the lending institution, the risk-bearing institution is taking. And they just pay whatever the transaction fee is to transact over, a Visa network or Visa plus Apple Pay network, or Apple Pay network I think was built on top of MasterCard. But ultimately, all those fees ultimately get paid by the your neighborhood restaurant or dive bar or Home Depot or your gas station.
Well, that's like saying, the consumer pays it ultimately. The gas station is not paying out. They're paying one thing. Like, as a merchant, I use Stripe. I just pay Stripe. I don't know or care what bank the customer's credit card is. I don't pay an amount to those banks. I don't pay, a different amount to to Visa or American Express, Stripe just deducts the amount and sends it on to me, and it's the same no matter what kind of card the user uses. Stripe has a fixed schedule of this is what you pay.
Isn't Stripe like isn't it like a PayPal or Venmo? Isn't Stripe kind of just a payment service thing?
Well, it's a merchant.
It's not a bank. It's a service. It's like a PayPal or Venmo.
But it's much more developer and user friendly than some of the other networks.
Mark, did you go away intentionally?
Yeah, my watch says not to stand.
Oh, okay. Jeff, you just threw something in the chat room, and I don't think it is off topic since we're having this discussion.
Oh, all right then. Here I am, just stirring or smacking the hornet's nest really hard. Retailers charging you an extra fee for using an Amex card is actually brilliant marketing on Visa's part, because Visa has convinced retailers that it costs more to do an Amex transaction than say a Visa or MasterCard transaction. 100%. And the reality is Amex doesn't make retailers pay the cost of all those credit card perks that you get, the points, the travel point, whatever, because someone has to pay for it. So that's retailers. In the case of Visa and MasterCard, whereas with Amex cards, they don't pay that. So even though there's another cost that goes along with using an Amex card for transaction for the retailers, overall, they're paying less for an Amex transaction than they do for Visa transactions. And, so I guess high five to Visa for being so good at marketing that and getting so many people to believe it that it's just accepted as fact now when it's actually cheaper to use an Amex.
I don't know if I would go there, because if you do a quick search on merchant fees for Amex versus Visa and MasterCard, you'll see that it's not quite. I put it in the chat. I think they did a good job of scaring people. I don't think it's that big of a difference. So when in
the end, it's not that much of a difference,
right? So
and certainly not worth charging extra for a card.
Are you losing a sale because you're walking to the store and you're not going to pay unless it's Amex, and that's possible. And that's why some people accept American Express and some people don't, merchant wise, right? So the gamble is: are you going to make less money if you accept it, or more money if you accept it? If it works out, more people have an Amex card, and that's the same back to our story with Apple Pay. If more people have Apple Pay, and you accept Apple Pay, and even if it costs a little bit more money, volume wins. So the more volume you have, more people have access to their money, the more you're going to sell.
Well, and how
I have a public service announcement, which is kind of funny given what we're talking about. But I just got a text message from Wells Fargo, which I haven't done business with, since 1982. Mm-hmm. It says your account is pending closure due to suspicious activities. Visit blah 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 to resolve your account. And this was sent. If everyone wants to block this as a spam caller or a hostile caller, area code 631-620-9474. So financial scam and fraud is alive and well.
That's big business.
Absolutely. But just to wrap it up, though, I want to make a point that think back to the early days of Apple Pay and frankly, some of the early days of the pandemic. And a lot of us, and I know I was among them, there were stores that if I had a choice, I would go to store B because they took Apple Pay as opposed to store A.
I did too. And my drugs were at CVS and they didn't take it. And they started with their stupid thing that Walmart tried that Mark was talking about. And it was pissing me off. And I would go there every time I picked up my medicine. I would actually wouldn't go Karen on them, but I would say something and say, this is stupid. Just go to Apple Pay. And then 2 months later, they gave up on their own thing and went to Apple Pay. So,
but
it was because of you, Warren.
It's possible.
Thank you, Warren.
Thank you. Yes.
They got the president on the line of CVS and say, "Hey, this guy Yardley's crazy with this Apple thing."
Warren, we definitely don't want you off your meds. So
Yeah.
thank God.
Hey, you won't be for a lot longer
I
than-
imagine the conversation was, look, I mean, we need to make sure he has his meds. But on top of that, do you know how much money he spends at Best Buy and here?
Or
We
me for a lot
cannot
longer than
You should own
risk
stock in
this.
Best Buy.
Best Buy was very Best Buy was one of our first Apple Pay people, so they knew where my money was, and
Oh, they do. When they all you have to do is look up your account. They know very well.
All right, guys, let's move on. Listen, it wouldn't be MacVoices Live if we didn't whip on Facebook just a little bit. And so I mean, curious. Sometimes I think maybe I take the wrong message out of headlines. So I just threw this one in the chats. Meta will no longer pay U.S. publishers for news content. So, first of all, I was a little surprised that Meta was paying publishers at all for their content. But second, does this really do? I mean, what I took out of this was that Facebook is even going to be less reliable as a news source, as a quality information source, because now they won't pay for that content. Did I just miss something, or is that a reasonable conclusion?
No, they pay for it. I would think it's the other way around. I thought these news content providers wanted to get on, maybe pay Facebook to be there.
No.
No,
They've been. I think that Facebook should pay them, and anybody that refers them. I think they have it backwards. Warren, you're thinking correctly.
They're wrong. I'm right.
I
like that.
But things like newspapers and stuff are like they go to the legislatures around the world, and I think they've got their way in Australia, and I think some places in Europe are thinking about this too. They're like, "Oh, Facebook is stealing our content by linking to it." That's their view of the world.
Right. Not
there's
like,
something to be said.
not like I'm a writer. Here's my story on Facebook. A lot of people are reading it, and I'm happy because more people are looking at it.
That is not how they view the world. Their view is Facebook is stealing. And I think in Spain they got it. A law that Google had to pay them. So Google just turned off all links to news in Spain, and then they complained, "Hey, we're not getting any traffic anymore." So
I remember that.
Well, if I'm understanding this correctly, the problem that the publishers are complaining about is Facebook posting content from the publications where viewers don't have to leave Facebook's website to go read the content. Therefore, the publishers are not getting the revenue that they would get when people show up to their web pages. And so Facebook was saying, we will pay you money for the content that we are reposting on our site. And now they're saying, actually, screw that. We're not going to do that.
But wouldn't they just not post at least the full article, or at least do what everybody else does and say, read more here, click? If
that's not what Facebook wants. They don't want you to leave Facebook.
They don't, with the promise that I'm going to pay you money because we're doing this. But if they're not doing that, then New York Times or whoever it is says, screw you. And here's the first few lines, and click here if you want to see the rest. So
Chris in the chat room says, was Facebook paying to establish credibility?
No, I think they were originally trying to get the content to increase stickiness to their site. Now, this gets really technical in terms of how they would be displaying it, because if they use a mechanism called an iframe, basically what it does is it chops out a little part of your browser and allows you to insert content from another site. So using that, that's sort of maybe analogous to stealing, because they're encapsulating within the Facebook experience the ability to read an article from some other site.
And that's true. Like if you had access to a paywalled site on the New York Times and copied and pasted it on MacVoices website, that's you're stealing it.
Right. But, I think, again, I think this came up about 3 or 4 years ago with Facebook and also with Google, because Google got similar criticism about its news site. And I think they both capitulated and agreed somehow to pay money to the original publisher. Facebook now, they're under duress, and they're saying, oh, well, we're just going to screw that. That's not central to what we do. So they're not saying if they're no longer going to have it or if they just want to be freeloaders. So I think a little bit more in-depth reporting needs to be done on this.
I guess, it's an interesting problem, and it is as old as the internet itself. Some sites are out there saying, please come and look at my content, repost my content. Yes, I'm looking for the eyeballs. I'm looking for the recognition. And then other sites like the newspapers or former newspapers, now news sites, are saying, hey, we're providing this stuff. We want to be paid for it. So we've already got your eyeballs. We want your wallet now. And so it's an interesting back and forth. But if Facebook really is in trouble, I'm a little surprised that this would be one of the first things they cut. Because if I was going to Facebook for whatever reasons I go to Facebook, and one of them happened to be news, then that's giving me more value to be part of the Facebook community. So they just took a chunk out of the value proposition for Facebook by not having news from reliable news sites.
But
it doesn't
Chuck,
mean
the reality is we don't know how much Facebook Facebook was paying, and there may be these scuzzy, scummy, alternate news, alternate reality sites who are motivated or paid by different things that they don't care if they get sucked up at Facebook because that's their entire objective. So I agree with the point you made earlier. Doesn't this degrade the veracity of anything somebody reads on Facebook? I think, yes, it certainly does. But does Facebook care? I don't know. I will have to see this because the numbers I read seem a little low, like it's $100 or $200 million. I would figure that's a drop in the bucket, for Facebook for traffic acquisition and other expenses, which makes me think, okay, this may be a lot more than they're publicly disclosing.
Yeah, Jeff, you were saying?
Oh, what was I saying? I remember now. Okay, so I'm looking at what's going on here from the perspective of a content creator. And so I'm imagining Facebook is doing exactly what so many companies do, which is to say, look at all the visibility we're getting you. That's like getting paid because you're getting so many more eyes on your content. So, we should pay you
for free. You should do it for
we're paying you in visibility, and visibility doesn't pay the mortgage. So, my guess is that this is where we are right now, where Facebook is saying, we're doing you a favor by giving you visibility. And the publications are saying, yeah, and we can't pay rent with that. So pony up some cash. And Facebook is like, you know what? Screw it. We're not going to work with you.
I agree. This is not the end of the story.
Yeah. I don't know. It really struck me as interesting. And like I said, we have to do a Facebook story here one way or another.
Well, at least that's not an Elon Musk story.
Yeah.
Did you buy Twitter?
Okay, so look, this is not a political show, and we don't do political discussions. However, this particular article came in, and I thought this was really interesting. This is the one where iMessage encryption was one reason Secret Service lost January 6 texts and may prevent employees from using iMessage in the future.
I wholeheartedly disagree.
Me too.
And I have some logic behind that.
Hold it, Jeff. What do you disagree with?
That iMessage encryption is the reason this content was lost.
Okay. All right.
They didn't say that at all. They said they routinely delete it. They said on the news tonight, when an employee leaves their post, they wipe the phone. That's exactly what
yes, but the part that they didn't say probably on the news thing, is that the part of their workflow is that each employee is supposed to do the routine phone backup, and employees were not doing their backups.
Right.
Therefore, the content was lost. So that's not an iMessage encryption problem. That's an employee
Process.
and company policy enforcement problem. And I would say the same thing if this was turned and it was like actually an Android encryption thing, and that was being pointed out as the reason this stuff was lost. No, this is on the Secret Service completely failing to follow their own procedures, and I won't go so far as to say and being okay with it, but I will go so far as to say and not actively working to address this, which is something that they should have been doing all along.
So Jeff, let's take that, and break it apart. So if if the Secret Service agents did their backup, so they would back up presumably to a Mac, maybe a Windows machine, and then they have an encrypted backup there. So if they leave and then the phone is wiped, they're left with an encrypted backup. How does that not support the headline and the claims in the story?
Well, okay. So the assumption that we're making here is that each phone is managed through an individual iCloud account, and when you're dealing with a system like this, you're dealing with managed phones that are using the company accounts, and the company, in this case, the Secret Service, ultimately has access to the content of those phones because it's being backed up through their company accounts. So,
but you're making this, you're making an assumption there. I'm making a totally valid assumption. That the Secret Service is following best practices, but get real. We're talking about our government, so it wouldn't be surprising that they weren't handling it at that.
There's
level.
No way that they are handling each phone as an individual device, and they're not doing MDM and total group management and group account management. There's no way. Even with the government and
I have a friend that works for the CIA in there. I could ask.
David, I want you in on this because
I know for a fact they're using Jamf. Again, they've been using Jamf. This shirt I'm wearing is from a Jamf conference from years ago. I know that I talked to people at that conference and that work for the government, whether it be the Navy or the Secret Service, that they have an MDM and they have some serious restrictions on what can be backed up to the cloud or not. They want to do a local backup. They want to keep it within their network. They don't want that stuff outside of the network. They were doing a lot of on-premise MDM and
they have their own cloud infrastructure. My friend who works for the government, their building has a version of the internet that we don't have, and that's how they get out. Their phones go into a box.
Warren and Dave, you're supporting Jeff's contention that these phones weren't being backed up in violation of whatever their policies are, and that's why stuff was lost.
It's possible the Secret Service people were not making sure. They
could have done it as a policy, but then there's the law that they read on the news tonight that said the federal electronic rule that they have is you have to hold the data for a couple of years, and that's something they're fighting now. There's also Sarbanes-Oxley, which came 20 years ago, which is a law. There's things out there that says you're supposed to have a copy of some information for a certain amount of time after a termination of an employee.
But how do you mandate for a Secret Service guy who came back and is tired as hell and just wants to go home and never backs up the phone?
Not an excuse.
Because they don't.
I'm not saying it's an excuse. I'm saying I'm trying to probatively try to figure out, okay, what is the large scale failure mechanism here?
If they have an MDM and Jamf was supposed to take care of the backups, which it's supposed to do, I'm guessing, among other things. And Jamf is supposed to tell that agent's phone when he's super tired to back up to Jamf or wherever it's backing up to.
And if he doesn't do it, then what happens?
But
He can't not do it. It's not his phone.
It's not his phone.
That's what
There's
MDM
a
does.
MDM which puts a profile on your thing that says things
It
that
enforces policy.
yeah on your phone where you could hit yes and no.
Okay,
Well, you can't do that on some
so
phones.
this is where I'm trying to drive this thing. So you're saying, okay, the Secret Service agent, whatever his or her motivations are, it doesn't matter. The phone should automatically be backing itself up because they're using Jamf, and it's just going to happen.
This is not to yeah. I'm not blaming these individual agents. I don't think they had anything to do with any of this.
No,
I'm going higher. I'm going to whoever's managing the IT,
Something
or whoever's
infrastructure,
managing
right.
the infrastructure, or whoever made that policy that said we're on this day you're leaving, we wipe your phones, which is also kind of for Secret Service kind of ridiculous to me too. I don't think that should be the case either.
This story is like chaff being shot out of a jet trying to divert a missile.
Yeah.
Chuck,
Chuck, what did you
people
do?
see that they're in
You said we're not
trouble and they're trying
We're
to
not political.
get Apple into trouble
Well,
for what they've done.
I didn't hear anything about this. I only heard that I didn't hear that Apple was being blamed. I just heard that their infrastructure made a conscious decision to delete out the phone.
Right,
on a certain
exactly.
date.
But this story is they're trying to say, oh, no, it's not our fault. It's Apple's fault.
Sure. I'm sure somebody
Always
else.
Apple's
somebody
fault.
else. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
if you could blame a company that has $1 trillion, then do it. If you can figure it out.
So Webb in the chat room points out that Sarbanes-Oxley does not apply to the government. So
Right.
thank you, Webb.
No, but they have their own
Public
laws.
corporations.
Right.
But the
Corporation.
government
But
has
but
their
but,
law.
but there are
They have
definite
theirs.
laws for the government.
If you think the panel's wound up now on the issue of the Secret Service claiming they lost messages because of iMessage's encryption, wait till you see the conclusion in the next edition of MacVoices. I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. As always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.